Adelante.
Buenas tardes, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a la conferencia magistral del Encuentro Anual de Investigación, Innovación y Creación de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Les saluda Isabel Guerrero, profesora del Departamento de Economía de la PUC. En esta oportunidad, el Departamento de Economía de la PUC tiene el placer de presentar a la doctora María Cunha-e-Sa, quien es profesora principal de Economía en la nueva Escuela de Negocios y Economía de la Universidad Nova de Lisboa. Ella tiene un PhD en Economía de la Universidad de Illinois, en Urbana-Champaign, en los Estados Unidos. Sus campos de interés en investigación son la economía de los recursos naturales y del medio ambiente, con énfasis en la valoración económica de bienes y modelamiento bioeconómico. María tiene una larga trayectoria en la coordinación de proyectos. Ha publicado en varias revistas científicas, entre ellas Journal of Environmental Economics and Management, American Journal of Agricultural Economics, Land Economics, Environment and Resource Economics, Journal of Economic Dynamics and Control, Energy Economics, Ecological Economics. María ha sido miembro del comité editorial de la revista Environment and Development Economics desde el 2008 hasta el 2021 y en Economía Agraria y Recursos Naturales de la Asociación Española de Economía Agrícola desde el año 2014. María también es revisora en las revistas relacionadas a su campo de investigación. Ha sido vicepresidente de la Asociación Europea de Economistas de los Recursos Naturales y Ambiente, EAR, y ha sido elegida presidenta de la Asociación Hispano-Portuguesa de Recursos Naturales y Ambiente, AERNA, desde el 2008 hasta el 2012. Desde el año 2017 es la directora científica del Centro de Conocimiento de Economía Ambiental de NOVA. Es también la representante país de Portugal en EAR, y la representante de la Escuela de Negocios y Economía de NOVA en el Comité Académico de NOVA para el Mundo de la Universidad Nova de Lisboa. Ahora, los participantes pueden elegir el idioma que desean escuchar la presentación. Abajo de su pantalla, al lado del icono de compartir pantalla, deben ver un icono de mundo, en donde le pueden dar clic y pueden elegir si desean escuchar la presentación en inglés directamente como lo va a hacer María o traducida al español. Entonces, mientras van haciendo esto, le doy la palabra a María, bienvenida, quien presentará el tema de políticas públicas sostenibles para el medio ambiente, el rol de la economía.
Well, thank you very much. So it's really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. And so first of all, I would like to send saludo a todos. Despite that I cannot speak Spanish, but it's I really enjoy being here today. And I hope that you also enjoy what I'm gonna talk about. And obviously, to be great, I don't know what are the rules, but I don't know if you can interrupt me in the middle or all the questions come at the end. But for me, that's up to you, so that's fine. You can always interrupt me if that's the case. So thank you, and I'm ready to go. And also I would like also to thank a special thanks to Professor Isabel Guerrero, which is the moderator of this session. Thank you.
Now, I guess, can you share your screen now so we can all see your presentation and we can start? Well, as you mentioned that you are okay with both, either if they interrupt you in the middle of the presentation or we leave the comments at the end. Maybe we leave the comments at the end, it's better. So we have all that Q&A session at the end.
Okay, so thank you. Let me just ask you something else. So, if I don't think that I'm going to speak more than 30 minutes, but if you think that it's already, I should stop, you can just let me know like 10 minutes before the hour or something, okay? So may I begin?
Yes, but please share your screen first. So,
but it's shared.
It's shared. I cannot. I cannot see it right now. Yes. And we have to.
You cannot?
No, I cannot.
I'm sorry then. Yeah, okay. Can you?
Not yet.
Oh. If for any reason this is not working.
Will be okay. Maybe that you leave the meeting and then come back and then share it again, because you were able to do it before.
I think now it's done.
Oh,
Yeah.
now it's starting. Okay,
Yeah,
now we can see
for
it.
any reason this is not working. I'm sorry.
Yes, perfect. Don't worry. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think now that you have to put it in full screen. And
yeah, sorry. Right. Is this okay now?
yes, perfect. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much. So the title of this presentation is about the sustainable public policies for the environment, the role of economics. And well, this I've tried to, it's a brief presentation of important issues that we address in environmental economics, which is environmental and natural resource economics, which is in fact my research field. So let me first begin by just mentioning, or what you have in this slide is the definition of sustainable development. The reason why I begin with this quote, which is in fact from Jeffrey Sachs in The Age of Sustainable Development from 2015, I just want to call your attention to the fact that we have, so the sustainable development is in fact about not only about the environmental pillar, but in fact it addresses all the different circumstances of development, of economic development. So, as it says, well, besides the SDGs, which are instrumental to the concept in this sustainable development calls for a world in which we have economic progress, we have poverty eliminated, so issues of equity are important, social trust, environment protected from human degradation. So also the pillar economic, social, environmental, and also governance, all of them matter. So the reason why I mention this is because sometimes people focuses only on environment. When they talk about sustainable development, we have to not to forget that in fact all these issues are at stake. Another point that I would like to make here is the fact that one of the important issues that are raised by sustainable development and by this approach is the fact that this is in fact a concept that is intertemporal. That is, it in fact requires, so we are looking into the future, and obviously we need to take into account the impact that we have today on future generations. So this intergenerational equity is really an important issue in this context. So we are in fact looking into the future. So we need to take into account that our actions in the present are going to affect the welfare of future generations in many different dimensions. So what is in fact, well, just very quickly, I'm not sure exactly what is the audience that I have today. So well, for sure that I will have their economists, but it's likely that are other in fact researchers from other fields. So that's why I began with like the beginning, but at least pardon for the repetition, but in any case, it's just to be sure that well, there are important concepts that are relevant for what follows. So obviously we know that economics is about people's choices, and we know that in economics, the issue is that we have to allocate resources that are scarce, and definitely we need to use the resources in the best way. We know that this affects our welfare, and therefore it's how we allocate those resources across the different types of the choices that we make, and all the impacts that these have on our well-being. So that's an important point. I'll come back later to this. So we know also that our everyday life is made of choices. In economics, we have this framework which basically sets, it's a way of simplification of the real world. We have models that try to address the different issues, but obviously cannot capture the complexity of the reality. And it's important also to consider that all decisions that we take, typically in economics, we always have, so we are always looking in terms of trade-offs. So an important concept is the opportunity cost. That is, it's whenever we decide on solution A versus, or decision A versus solution A versus solution B, we know that in fact we are losing, or so the opportunity cost of choosing A is in fact the net benefit forgone for having chosen A instead of the next best alternative, which would be B in this case. So we are always making trade-offs, and so the analysis is a marginal analysis. So in fact, we need, for any decisions that we have to take, we have costs, and we have to, in fact, evaluate costs and benefits of the different alternatives, and therefore choose the one that will be, for which the net benefits are maximized. So the economic analysis encompasses, two important ways of looking at economics. First, we have what we call the positive economics versus normative. And the positive economics, basically what it does is describes what we do. So it's obviously if there is some kind of disagreement between in this context, typically we use data to show exactly what happens. Now, on the other hand, we also, another perspective is the normative perspective. And the normative is more on recommendations. How should we, so what should we do? And these are the examples of these. Should we, for instance, how should we control for CO2 emissions? That's a question that, in fact, falls in this normative economics. So we need, it's based on criteria, and therefore this means there is a value judgment behind it, underlying it. So obviously we might not agree, because we may value, some of us may value different types of issues. But in any case, the point is that, so in this case, what we are aiming at is understanding how should we, so not what in fact has happened, but how should things work, how should we intervene? And this again is obviously a very important perspective because this has very important implications to public policy design. In fact, normative economics is based on criteria. So decisions that we take concerning, for instance, CO2 control, CO2 emissions control, or any others, always we have underlying them criteria. I will mention briefly that later. So the criteria are basically efficiency, static and dynamic, and then equity, and well, intergenerational fairness is already taken into account in the equity. So, well, so first of all, let me just mention, just to move into environmental economics, the role of prices in market economy. So we know that prices are the basics for, you know, the way, a very important mechanism to make economic decisions. And what is the interpretation? What do they mean? Is exactly, well, the price is how much society would gain if a little more of the good were made available. I would like also to mention that one thing is a market price, which depends on supply and demand, and another thing is the economic value. And the economic value is, in fact, the benefit, the total benefit that we can, obtain when you consume a given amount of the good. Typically, the benefit that we get, the total benefit that we get from accessing to that amount of the good is higher than the price. So, and this is in fact the basis, or underlying this concept is in fact or based on this concept, we have, it's like a welfare measure. That is, how can we measure the impact of different types of intervention in economy, who is winning or gaining and who is losing. So this is just very briefly important concept. So prices, in fact, play a very important role in the sense that they provide the incentives to economic agents to allocate resources in line with social interests. So in principle, this should be the case if the market, let's say, works well, in quotes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. So in fact, the idea is that we don't need in this context an explicit coordination because prices do that. So if we have excess supply, prices go down, and this means that we'll have increase demand, and the other way around, if we have excess demand, prices go up, and this encourages production, and so equilibrium is obtained. The market equilibrium is achieved. Okay, so if in fact the incentives that drive individuals and businesses in this economy are aligned, that is privately and socially, that each individual, the per se, and the society as a whole, then market equilibrium and welfare, that is the welfare or we can, in fact, with the resources, the scarce resources available, we are able, in fact, everybody's able to get the highest possible welfare that, in fact, given in this world. Now, the problem, and it's what is at stake, that's my question, so it's that, does it always work? Well, if we think 1 second, we understand that this is not the case, because how can we, if this is the case, how can we explain the continuous degradation of natural environments, like threat of depletion on fish stocks, air quality, water scarcity in general in life support systems? So how can we explain that? Well, let me then motivate environmental economics, and in fact, why and how can we, in fact, explain and what in fact environmental economics can contribute, and natural resource economics as well, you know, to improve our knowledge, and therefore to have let's say, to also improve or have a knowledging quality of the the environment, acknowledging what is in fact the condition of the environmental asset. How can we in fact intervene in order to improve the condition of those in fact the condition of this asset, and therefore obviously increase our well-being as well. So let me, this is based on a very interesting paper by Kathleen Segerson, which is a very well-known environmental economist. And this paper, it's a very interesting one for those that are interested on these issues. And basically what Kathleen Segerson does in this paper is trying to explain why environmental economics became important and why it was later than it was not. It's let's say this field is in fact a recent field compared to others, and there is a reason for that, and I'll try to motivate that. So let's look first at so how can we let's say the traditional view of economics was the one that we have on the left. So what we see here is like the standard circular flow diagram, where you see that basically it's about, as if we look at this picture, we see that economics is typically represented by markets and flows of money. So firms, market factors, and this is exactly what was typically representing the traditional view for economics. Now, the fact is that, is this in fact what is going on? Well, at some point, in fact, it was clear that this was not, in fact, given all the problems that we faced and we were facing, it was clear that this was could not represent what was going on, and therefore we need to, in fact, improve our understanding and having, building, let's say, an alternative view. And the alternative view is the one that you have on the right. So what we have on the right is that after a while, and we know that as population grew and growth all over, we know that at some point we faced more and more the degradation of the environmental asset. And this was caused because, in fact, the environmental asset was the waste of human activity. And therefore, at some point, this became, in fact, that became clear that that something has to be done or had to be done about it. And therefore, this implied, the idea was that up to then was that we have, of course, nature was always there, and human activity on the other side. But the point was that for many years, and there was a lot I could explain more on this, but let me be brief on this. So the point is that there were reasons also for that. But in any case, what matters is that typically what was assumed was that we have humans. They develop their activities and then basically assume that nature was not reacting. So there was no feedback from nature on humans. And this, after some point, was clear that we were more and more degrading the natural environment, and of course people were already being hurt, and there were negative consequences to local and globally for the world, right? So it was, in fact, at that point, so the perspective that's exactly where environmental and natural resource economics became important. So the idea is, in fact, the one that we have here. So we have human activity and you have nature, but the point is that, so while nature provides ecosystem services, so that is the benefits that are provided by the natural system, the fact is that humans impact on nature, and importantly, so the relationship is more impacts and flows of goods and services that often are outside marketplace. And so this means that we have here the fact that we interact with nature does not, well, obviously nature also reacts. So we have a feedback effect from one side to the other. And this, if we do not take this into account, obviously, it's not possible. It's not possible to understand what is going on, and therefore the approach is completely inadequate to the circumstances that we live, that we face every day. So this is the alternative view. So let me just point out that this idea of the flows of goods and services often occur outside marketplace are namely directly related, so they are externalities, but in fact they are, these externalities, which I'm going I will define in a minute. So what this system is, the so-called coupled natural human or system or socio-ecological system. Therefore, we cannot, in fact, so we need to understand that whenever we decide, we manage our land, the sea or the ocean, we have impact on nature, and therefore nature also reacts, and we need to adjust so there is a feedback effect that is permanent, but this also changes radically our analysis, namely this introduces what is called the ecosystem-based approach. What is the ecosystem-based approach? Well, the ecosystem-based approach is this human-impacted ecological system as this coupled socioeconomic ecological, where human behavior is taken as feedback response, affecting and affected by ecological variables. So why is this imply such a different perspective? Well, first of all, because we end up with a model. So suppose that we have the case of fisheries. You know that there is, of course, the decisions that are taken by fishermen obviously affect the stock, the state or the condition of the stocks. And therefore, this means that, so the markets, so how demand so the markets are going to affect the amount of harvest, how the harvest, how the fish is going to be taken from the ocean. And obviously, this is going to affect the condition of the natural ecosystem or the fisher, the stock. And this stock is going obviously to adjust to the circumstances. And therefore, it's exactly because of that, well, in a circumstance, there are many issues in this context, but in fact, it's a good, because also if everybody can have access to it, therefore we have a problem, or we may have a problem. So we need to regulate this relationship, and that's what the ecosystem-based approach does. So the bioeconomic modeling is exactly an example where we integrate the ecological circumstances, the ecological conditions in an economic model that maximizes, for instance, the welfare from, for fishing in the sea. But it's important that we also take into account what is going to happen in terms of what is the impact that this has on nature, and therefore how nature is going to feedback. So this makes the problem much harder, because the problem is, of course, dynamic. We have time lags because things do not occur immediately. We have feedback loops because we have feedbacks from one side to the other. We have thresholds, because you know that we know that in fact we do not know, well, we still do not know much, but we know that typically the impacts do not occur linearly, or often do not occur, and we might have a circumstance in which, in fact, the threshold, wherever it is achieved, and therefore this might determine some disruption in this support system, life support system. So this makes the problem much harder. And I would like also to stress that this is building on this concept of ecosystem services. And again, what are they? The benefits that ecosystems provide to humans and their contribution to well-being. And this coincides. This is a concept, as you can see, that's not so old. And the reason why is because it was at that point that, in fact, it was clear that the negative consequences of the condition of the natural environment were in fact having impact on our well-being, namely on health, and on health. So they have a very negative on the availability of some resources, and therefore this means that this concept was exactly a consequence somehow introduced in this context, in the context where, in fact, it was clear and people were clearly aware of the scale, the impact, the scale of the impact that humans were having on the environment, and this is related. So it's in fact even more. Let's say it goes beyond the concept of this externality, in the sense that it's some activity that impacts another one. The production and consumption of one agent can affect, in real terms, the production or consumption of some other person. It is unintended, but at the same time non-compensated. But in fact, the problem goes beyond this, because it in fact already addresses issues as climate change, loss of biodiversity, etc. So in fact, this concept is related to the fact that the economic agents have in fact realized the impact that in fact our activity had on nature. So I would just like to mention that, so this is really very important. That's the way to address these issues, is in this context. So we cannot look just on, like, well, biologists in the past assumed that harvest was in fact exogenous in the case of fisheries, but obviously this cannot be. So we need to, in fact, that this interaction is key. And of course, nowadays we have more models that are more complex, but also can also in fact provide better insights. And of course, this ultimately would lead to let's say a better informed public policy decision making, namely when controlling fisheries, for instance. So now it's important that to understand and to address this the environmental degradation. So it was clear at this point that in fact, well, environmental economists had to be, well, were important, but also not only that, is that we cannot, or we need to also people from natural sciences. That is, multidisciplinarity is absolutely crucial for sustainable well-being. This is more and more now, because we have more problems are more complex. We have data that is more and more complex. Besides, we have data at a local level, so we do not, so it's not, problems are global, and I'm going to mention that. Well, like climate change, the costs are global, but they are local as well. And over time, even in locally over time, and spatially and over time they change. So this means that problems get much more difficult to tackle, but also at the same time more difficult to generalize. But that's a consequence. But in any case, to tackle and address them in a correct way, we need this multidisciplinarity is crucial. That's why in environmental economics, this is absolutely crucial. Nowadays, it's very difficult, even for us in our projects, not to have natural scientists. It's very common to have, you know, biologists, for instance, are absolutely crucial besides other fields. So let me, okay, so, sorry. So now, what can we, so how do, in fact, let me take this, because, sorry. Okay, so one important, sorry, what's going on here? I don't know what happened, but maybe I did something wrong, sorry. Okay, so how can we see the environment? So what is our contribution? So it's important to keep in mind that this invisible hand that I was, you know, mentioning about this mechanism of prices, of course, only work and markets are only, you know, work well, in quotes, whenever we have that goods and services traded are private, not public, and there are no differences between private and social costs and benefits of economic activities. That is, no external effects. And whenever this happens, so why so whenever this happens, the market, well, fails or does not work. So this leads, so public good features, which is in fact what this is about, in fact lead to market failures. So let me just mention that we have first, so the external effects, I already introduced you the concept of externality, this idea that we impact the activity of someone else or the consumption or production. It's a real impact, and this impact is unintended, it's a byproduct of the activity, and besides, it's not compensated. So this means, in this case, if that's the case, an example is like pollution. Of course, if we have a power plant, obviously there is a byproduct, which is air pollution, local pollutants, for instance, and obviously this means that costs, private and social, are different because, and therefore we do not have this, the incentives between individuals and society are not aligned. And the same occurs, well, this is related somehow to this issue of the kind of goods that we are talking about. Well, this I'm not going to explain, well, I do not have time to explain this in detail, but the point is that many of the environmental externalities are in fact public goods or have characteristics of public goods, which means that they fail either on being rival or being excludable, which leads to the lack of property rights. And I could give you very many examples, like, for instance, air quality, the clean air, and many others. So this means that, well, markets don't work. So what is the consequences? Well, the consequences is that in the presence of these market failures due to these public good features, either prices do not exist, or if they exist, do not reflect the social cost of the activity. What is the problem with this? The problem is that if in this case, this means that, in fact, if we are not able to, so if there are no markets, there is no price. If there is no price, it's as if the opportunity cost of using the environment is zero, while it's not in fact zero, because we know the reason is just because there is a failure, a market failure, and so we need to address it. Well, so what is the consequence of that? Let me give you an example. Suppose that you have a coastal area and there is a real estate firm, the business that is going to develop some property. So they are going to build there some resort. Obviously, this is suppose that this is dunes in the coast. We know that dunes are very important to protect from coastal erosion. So, but obviously the benefit that dunes provide, if they are not accounted for, so if you don't know what are their benefits, we do not have a value for it, definitely what is going to happen is that this real estate is going to develop more than it should be, because it's as if the opportunity cost of developing is zero. So this leads, so the fact that if we cannot, in fact, if we do not measure, or we are not able to measure the benefits, to value the benefits provided by the natural ecosystems, obviously this means that typically the public policy is going to ignore them, and therefore too little preservation, too much degradation. So for conservation purpose, it's really critical that we are able to estimate the benefits that in fact reflect what we call the total economic value. So the total economic value that I'm going to just explain very briefly, it's a way to compare the benefits. It's a methodology. So total economic value is about the total value that is provided by these natural ecosystems. And of course, underlying this concept is a methodology. And the methodology is the one that it's really a very important part of environmental economics, which is the economic valuation of environmental goods. So why is this? So what do we do? Well, try to, in fact, find a way to estimate the benefits of those ecosystem services. So, in fact, there are different methods. I'm not going to that. You have this total economic value that basically is divided in use value and non-use value. And I'll make a comment concerning that. And then you have, in what concerns use value, you have different types. Let me just mention that it's important that the methods can be, we can have, so like use value can be measured. Use value means, well, it could be, for instance, the case of fish, we go to the market and we buy it. So the price is, in fact, it's a measurement, it's a way of valuing fish. And we eat, and so this is a consumptive direct use value. Now, but we may have other cases. For instance, we have a non-consumptive value, for instance, when we go to an exhibition or a museum, we enjoy, you know, if we enjoy it, of course, we go there, it's because we enjoy, and therefore there is, in fact, there is, when we are there, we take, we have a benefit. So this provides us a benefit, but this benefit is not consumptive, it's non-consumptive. So this requires other methods. And typically we can use, and the same, so then we have indirect use values like the regulation services, like, so the contribution to have clean water or the protection from coastal erosion. And then we have other values, option value and non-use value, that I'm going just to mention, but let me just, okay, option value, it's, as the name shows, it is well, we may suppose that we do not have information yet. And so maybe if we get more information in the future, we may prefer to wait and, you know, intervene in the future. So that's the idea of option value. So in this case, we can have, in fact, option values with respect to different types, the different types of services that provision and regulating and cultural, as long as we are talking about the future. Now, there is also this other option value, which is the kind of the what's called the bequest value. So it may be the case that I value, I'm willing to, so I'm willing to pay for a good. For instance, suppose that I'm for a place and or a natural protected area in Portugal somewhere that I would like, why am I'm despite that I'm not going there, I would like that this area will become pristine for, you know, my children. So that's in fact it's part of this option value. So it's another way. Now there is also a very important component, which is typically the case with environmental goods. So in environmental goods, we need typically to take, well, in some cases, but often we need to take into account, namely when we try to value or get the benefits from ecosystem services, natural ecosystem service, the idea of existence value. I can give you, this is difficult to measure, in fact, but there are methods, obviously, of course, that we cannot observe it. So we need to find ways of trying to estimate. The way we do it, so existence value is the fact that, suppose that I'm not going to Amazon, I've never been there to Amazonian forest, and I will not go until I die. So what does that, well, despite that I will not go, never go there, I might value it just because I value the fact that this forest is there or keeps going there, keeps being there. So that's the idea of existence value, and obviously this is much more difficult to obtain, to measure. But in fact, the typical environmental goods in general existence value is very much connected and very much related to them, and therefore these are present, and when they are present, we need to rely upon what we call the stated preference methods, which are methods in which we create hypothetical markets, and we try to elicit, to understand, to inquire the population concerning, you know, the value they are, yeah, willing, the elicit to those benefits. So in contrast, we may have like revealed preference methods, and revealed preference methods use, for instance, one example is the travel cost. One way of trying to understand what is the value. So suppose that, you know, I like to go to the to the beach, and I would like to understand what is the benefit I get from going to the beach. Well, the benefit I get from the beach is in fact the one I can infer about from the cost of going there, of traveling. So not only the time so that I spend, but also how much does it cost me to get there. So that's a way of and of course, depending on the quality of the beach, we can also make, you know, the so-called contingent behavior. So this is the problem here, is that, if we do not have markets, we have to find a way of obviously of estimating those benefits. Let me just mention that in what concerns the revealed preference, typically we only measure use value. Only when we have stated preference, we are able to measure non-use values. So are the most adequate. Okay, so now let me, so environment, it's important. Yeah, it's already late.
5 more minutes, Maria.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm a bit, yeah, I took more time, that's always the same, but let me, okay, so what I would like to, maybe to just to continue, so what I have next is that, well, these are more, I will probably move. One important issue is that the environment is a capital asset. I would like also to stress this. So it's what we call the natural capital. So this means provides a flow of a large variety of beneficial goods and services over time that are essential for survival. But it's important, and as any other asset, we can measure it, and the social value is given by the net present value of the flows of goods and services provided over time. I could go on that, but I think that, yeah. Okay, so this, what you have here is an example how to assess benefits and costs. Now, it's also important, and I would like just to make a quick comment on that, is the fact that typically our, the way we measure growth, typically we're using GDP, it's not appropriate because GDP does not take into account not only the depreciation, well, of natural capital, so natural capital is not considered, but also physical capital. So it's not only physical capital is considered. Sorry, this is social, not physical. Sorry, it's human, and also human capital is not taken into account. So in fact, the GDP is not a measure that in fact should be used in order to in fact infer about how, in terms of a sustainable growth path, how are economies doing all along those paths. So that's something that I would like. In fact, this is a very important issue. The World Bank has already some other indicators, adjusted net savings and green GDP there are, but it's really important to recall that as any other asset, well, nature is an asset as well and should be. So it's key also to consider in order to measure, in fact, what is the well-being, we need to include those the other types of capital, namely natural capital, but not only. So acknowledging what is the contribution of environmental economics for sustainable policy design. So first of all is acknowledging potential for trade-offs to evaluate policy options. So namely, we have, this is about the criteria that I mentioned before. So typically what we, in presence of a given intervention, it's important to understand what are the costs and the benefits. And this, well, if we have available the possibility of measuring benefits, and of course, we know the costs and we can in fact measure benefits, well, in that case, we can apply this efficiency concept, which means that the solution that we are going to pick is the one that maximizes the net benefits, or benefits minus costs. However, in many circumstances, often we do not have way of, it's very difficult in some cases to measure benefits. What we do, we rely upon a cost effectiveness criteria, which is minimize the cost of achieving a given goal. So then we need, and that's very important, to recognize the importance of behavioral response and the spillovers to the regulatory intervention for public policy effective. So create this, in fact, we know that regulatory intervention create different incentives across different economic agents that are heterogeneous. This is not only intra, but intertemporally, and I call your attention to the issue of anticipation. If I had time, I could give you interesting examples. Other important implications of regulatory intervention, namely in the context of climate change, this is super important, are the distributive effects of environmental policy. In the context of climate change, that's a good example. Costs are global, but they are also local. And we know that, in fact, not everybody suffers or is impacted in the same way. So this is interesting. Just let me call your attention to the fact that typically equity was not very important. It became very important in the context of climate change and in the transition to carbon neutrality, all the interventions. Examples of research questions very quickly, then I can talk about that. So what issues that we address? The net benefit of deploying solar power PV, so photovoltaic utility scale plants, power plants. In fact, this is an issue that it matters a lot in the case of Portugal, because we are in fact having a huge impact of these solar power plants, and in fact with a very detrimental consequence to the natural ecosystems. And we live, our economy depends a lot on tourism. And so this, besides tourism, but recreational activity is important, but also we don't know exactly what are the consequences of having these panels there like for 30 years. So this is something that we are researching. Another point is, like, suppose that we have an area, coastal area, where the risk of an oil spill or other hazard is non-negligible. Suppose this is part of a natural park, and suppose that it's used for different purposes like beaching, surfing, other recreational activity. Should it be preserved from a social perspective? Well, it's exactly the case in which we have in fact just finished a paper on this, and well, related also to credibility of institutions, thinking about different ways of payment vehicles. But the point is that we need, in order to preserve, we need to estimate the benefits, and therefore, if we need to fund, if we need to fund or to support the preservation, we need to preserve, we need to understand how people value them. So it's very important to understand what is the willingness to pay for, in fact, investing in prevention. So, and that's exactly what, it is crucial for conservation purposes. Then we have wildfires. That's another important issue. So they are destroying, as you know, Southern Europe has been severely hit, and this has a huge impact. But I would like to just call your attention to the fact that, in fact, that this, for instance, in Portugal is completely different from other regions, from other countries in the northern part of Europe. Why is that? And this is something that I would like to highlight. For instance, the fact that the kind of property, so forestry in Portugal is most, 93% is private, as in the northern countries like Finland and Sweden, but it's an exception. So this makes a big difference concerning how to tackle these issues. It's completely different from other contexts. So again, this is something that we tackle because obviously fires have a huge impact on ecosystem services, and the condition destroys, well, besides deforestation, has many other impacts on biodiversity, etc. And then another important issue is, as you know, well, economies, at least in EU, are very, we have been in fact increasing in the mix, in the energy mix, we have more and more renewables. And of course, this one consequence of that is that, well, electrification of these economies, it's an issue. It's important because as we are investing on renewables, the point is, as we have more and more energy that comes from renewable sources, it's important to use that and substitute for fossil fuel sources. Of course, one of the issues is, okay, electric cars, we should in fact substitute for electric cars, but the combustion for electric cars. But the problem is, how should we, in fact, how can people, is that the case that people are going to buy? Electric cars are quite expensive, besides other issues. So in fact, the governments have decided to subsidize, and they decided to subsidize it uniformly, independently of the level of income, which means that obviously this has very perverse, and this is a waste of resources. But so just there are many, so all these issues can be in fact tackled in the context of environmental economics, the distributive effects of increasing energy prices. And this is, again, this is related to environmental justice, which is really a very important topic, not only, well, all over. And why is this so important? Well, the idea is that should we, so in fact, we know that increasing energy prices, for instance, and now inflation rate due to that as well, the circumstances that we are living now in the world, we know that this, given the fact that demand for these low-income people is more inelastic, we know that obviously the share, so these low-income people are more severely hit than the high income. So the point is, how can we compensate them? So we need to have, so that all these policies to control emissions have distributive effects that we should take into account. And why is this so important? Well, besides the fact that we should take care, also we care about the well-being in general of the population, but the fact is that this is more and more relevant for governments that, in fact, need the support from the population, have to provide the support, because without their support it's very difficult, in fact, to implement the policies that are required. And this is now, there is in fact a very interesting, the change in the perspective of environmental economics, the idea that we should not be talking about as a benchmark in the social planner, the one that in fact has an infinite commitment and can in fact implement optimal policies that, maximizing the benefit from a social perspective, and the fact that this does not exist. So what we have are governments that are there, in charge or responsible for a couple of years or 4 years or 5, depending on the election period. And it's and of course we know that from one period to the other, things can change, like the United States, like Trump and then Biden changed completely. So this means that in fact this increases the vulnerability of the governments, and of course the population also understands that vulnerability. So there are many important issues, and there are many studies now in Europe regarding these issues. You remember all the problem that we have with the yellow vests in France, we had in Chile, we had also in Switzerland, but in any case, expression of the fact that people or the population is not willing to bear these costs, at least in the way things are. So we need to address this issue very seriously. Well, I'm finishing, sorry, I took more than I should. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, María, por esta presentación, por habernos presentado esta perspectiva desde la economía en un país como Perú, que es megadiverso, tanto en términos de ecosistemas y de especies, pero también en poblaciones. Y todas estas preguntas se vuelven relevantes, y los métodos también, para poder de alguna manera valorar y evaluar los costos-beneficios de las políticas que se implementan, ya sean para conservación o ya sean para temas específicos de desarrollo. Bueno, para terminar estaremos tomando 2 preguntas del público y poder cerrar ya esta presentación magistral de María, que ha abordado todo lo que es relevante en economía ambiental para el desarrollo sostenible.
Thank you very much.
¿Alguna pregunta del público? Bueno, yo tengo una pregunta solamente para cerrar. La hago en español y en inglés. En el contexto de Perú, donde en las zonas rurales, en muchos casos, por ejemplo, no hay mercados ni siquiera para algunos productos, específicamente en temas de agrobiodiversidad, ¿no? Muchas variedades de los distintos cultivos que existen en que el Perú es centro de origen de esos cultivos, como la papa, la quinoa, ¿no? Y todo ese proceso, pues no hay ni datos sobre las variedades y no se toman en las encuestas nacionales, y no hay mucha investigación al respecto, ¿no? Bueno, es mi tema, investigación. En este contexto, ¿qué metodologías sugieres usar para poder desarrollar políticas que permitan la conservación de la agrobiodiversidad andina?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Maybe it's better to answer in English, because I cannot speak Spanish correctly. So yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's very important. And what I think the most important, so what I would do is to first understand very well what is that community, you know. So we need to understand how the community is the different households that compose it. So it's really crucial to do well in these circumstances, since these populations are somehow isolated in quotes. What I would do would be, in fact, to go there and think about like a survey, organize the community and understand what they do. So it's really, you need, in order to be able to intervene, first of all, you need the data. So you need to understand, to know the community. And this means that you need, in fact, to know exactly what kind of households, the level of education, what do they do, so how do they live. So all this is absolutely crucial. And because you cannot intervene without knowing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's first. And after that, you can think about alternatives. There are ways of, you could think about, for instance, first of all, but you need to understand what's going on. You could think about issues like payment for ecosystem services. Yeah, so that could be, and this was done in many. So this was, for instance, you have in Costa Rica, for instance, there is a large intervention that was super important in terms of being able to conserve the forest. And you have also other programs like in Mexico, etc., where you not only tackle, the environmental aspect, but also the social one. But I think it's and all these actions, all these kind of initiatives cannot be undertaken without the support of the community. So that's why, to understand them, to communicate with them, to see how do they, in fact, the kind of exchanges they have. So all this is absolutely crucial then to basically to design some project that can, in fact, improve their well-being. And so, but first of all, I think without knowing, without having this data, it's impossible, because it's impossible to know exactly what they aim at, what they do, what are they, in fact. So I would say that we have a project in Mozambique where we are doing this kind of, so it's more on preservation of the mangrove forest, which is very important in central part of Mozambique, where you have, very prone to cyclones and so that's exactly. So we need first to know the community. That's crucial, and then you can think about alternatives.
Thank you very much, Maria, for your answer. Yes, definitely, lack of data is what we have in Peru and everywhere in the developing world, I guess. But yeah, I guess agricultural household models can kind of help to understand how these rural communities work, and might help to at least understand the basic trade-offs they make when they have to define decisions on conservation. Well, if there is no other, sorry,
I fully agree with you. That's true.
Thank you so much for this interaction and this presentation. Muchas gracias a todos y a todos por venir y por participar. De ahí concluida esta conferencia magistral y buenas tardes.
Thank you, Professor Isabel Guerrero. Thank you for your support and being, the moderator. And I would like again to thank you all of, I unfortunately cannot see you, but it was really a pleasure. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Gracias. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada.